From what we're understanding, each department has their own interview processes, their own hiring and their own hiring as well as training and development focuses that are not, and everything's not centralized. Um, and actually, I'll just go through my recommendations, and then I can talk about some of the, impacts that we found as we go through it. Um, the very first recommendation that we came up with as a committee was racial equity training with a budget for all city employees upon onboarding. One thing we noticed that depending on what department that you're in, you have your certain trainings and different type of onboarding practices, but racial equity training at the beginning of it was not centralized. We do feel as if, be it being under Amber's department or under HR with tagging in under Amber's department, that all city employees, despite what department that you're in, you need to have racial equity training, and even more equity training if you're being hired into a supervisor or role within the city. Um, when we talk about that, because when we start looking at the type of development and training that some of the city employees have, they many employees haven't had um, uh, any type of HR training since they were on board. So if we can get them at the beginning and then keep it to where they can constantly get it to be renewed. That will be beneficial for the city, and that's especially when we start talking about low hanging fruit. It's just the training aspect of it is one important point. Um, this Our second recommendation went along with that: work with community partners to develop racial equity framework to reverse uneven hiring and promotion standards. Um, that goes into getting anybody who's a supervisor within the city extra training so they can see where their unconscious biases are, as well as having every employee who works for the city, be it on the ground level or in higher offices down Broad Street, can be working from the same handbook. We need to audit and address the hiring practices in the city departments and dismantle systemic barriers to hiring qualified minority candidates. That goes into where we are recruiting at. Um, if we're looking at the diversity of the city staff and who's making what within the city, we can see many inequities at that point. Who's making six figures, who's making a livable wage within the city. So that's what we wanted to start trying to tackle with that. If we can get an audit of everybody's salary and try to see where do we have these inequities as far as qualified minority candidates, be it be it people who already work within the city or where we're recruiting from nationally to bring into the city. We definitely need to take a look at that. Increase recruitment pipeline and hiring diversity trainers for all city supervisors, managers, and human resource managers. That goes into the audit. Once we get an audit done, then we can begin to create a recruitment pipeline, particularly from the people that we already have working within the city. Well, it's great to do a national search, but we have some great talent within the city, and we want to keep the people within the city. We need to be able to give them upper mobility to knock down some of those systemic barriers and a lot of those glass ceilings. This was one that we went back and forth on, and we actually did a lot of research on, was to establish a livable wage for all city staff that coincides with the cost of living within city limits. If you work for the city of Charleston, you should be able to live in the city of Charleston, despite what job you have within the city of Charleston. Some of the research that we went through, and I actually talked to this professor up at MIT who created the livability wage for each county inside of the state, and they update this once a year. So for the most recent one, a livable wage for the county of Charleston will be $16.43. There's a lot of conversation, especially within the national media right now, about what is a livable wage and increasing the minimum wage to a livable wage. The city of Charleston can be on the forefront of the county and all of its cities around us, we can go ahead and just increase the wage for all city of Charleston employees to at least a livable wage, for to which this professor at MIT will put as $16.43. And I will go ahead and send Amber the rubric that they went by, and to where basically they say the livable wage is the cost of living, the basic cost of living plus the basic needs, as well as the taxes on all those basic needs. And that's how they came up with the $16.43. I will send the technical documents that we have here that further detail the research. But that's one of our biggest ones that we came up with, is increasing the all city staff to $16.43. And when we start looking at the city staff, then we also have to start thinking about the contractors, the people who are contracted to work for the city, who don't necessarily work for the city. We see that happening at the College of Charleston. We see that happening at a lot of institutions. We can say, all right, the city has a livable wage for all of its employees, but if you bring on a contractor and they don't have that, then what do they have? And they don't have that type of livable wage. That's just a way to get around it. Or even when we start looking at the racial equity framework, our next requirement will be, or our next recommendation would be, require all city contractors upon signing their contracts to adopt the city's racial equity framework before they can actually receive city funds. That makes everyone honest. That makes sure when we bring on contractors to work for the city, be it something as cleaning crews, that be it anybody who getting any type of contracting work as far as building in the city. If you're getting city funds, you need to be able to adopt our racial equity framework and show us that it's going to be put to use. And lastly, we said we need to reestablish the city-funded professional development and continuing education credits through Trident Technical College, as well as the College of Charleston, for all city employees. Um, for what we have, for what we understand, from what we have been told and from what we have been understanding, the city does not have a current contract to supply their workers with continual education credits, be it at Trident Technical College or the College of Charleston. We need to be able to reestablish that so we can create that upward mobility within our city employees. That way, they won't be sitting in the same job for 10, 15, 20 years. They can constantly be moving up, and we can start seeing the promotion and hiring throughout the city be more diverse, as well as keeping a lot of the people who we have within the city as the great workers that we have within the city, and not moving on to other places. So those were some of our recommendations that we have. And if you look at our report, we have basically addendum or appendices that you can go through to see where a lot of our research came from. We do plan to get this survey out. I guess Amber needs to go through legal, and then we have to find a way to get it disseminated to all city employees, because not all city employees have access to the computers. So we need to find the best way to disseminate this survey that we have going around through our committee right now, get it reviewed, and then also sent out so we can do a more in-depth get a more in-depth model of what we're looking at as far as getting people to where we need to be and getting the city where it needs to be. So I'll just leave it at that, and I'll take any questions from there.
Darren, that's very thorough and thoughtful, and certainly some of those things we've been working on making progress. I know when I got elected 5 or 6 years ago, we were paying some people basically federal minimum wage. I think maybe $8.50 an hour, and we've gotten it up to 13 something. So, you know, some of these things, even like the proposal for the $15 is graduated to step you there rather than an instantaneous thing. But I must say, I check that MIT figure every now and again, Now, I must admit, it might be a year ago since I checked it, but it was running, I thought more in the $13 range for Charleston County rather than 16. Was that including benefits or insurance or anything like that?
The model you're probably looking at was from 2019, 2020. This is the most recent one from 2020 to 2021.
Okay, all
Mhm.
right. All right, well,
So Darren,
Also, hold on one second, Jerome. While I have you, Mr. Mayor, one thing we were going back and forth on was the ban in the box, as well as the what are your expectations for pay that the Women's Commission tried to get to. So if you have any update on that, we would greatly appreciate that as well. So we ended up taking that out of the official recommendation because we didn't know where it stood.
yeah,
I have an update. I have an update from the Women's Commission.
okay.
Is that all right, Mayor? Yeah, we followed up. The Human Resources Director had authorized the company that city contracts with to do the application processing or of solicitations. They only, with our contract, I guess, they only allow one time a year where you can make changes to your application. So it took a while, but now the application does not ask for salary history. They ask for salary expected, and we have banned the box a long time ago. So we haven't asked that question in a long time.
Right. That's what we took that out of it. And I think Jerome's going to say something regarding what's the training and development piece.
yeah, I was going to raise the question. The chair is going to ask low hanging fruit question in a minute. And I think the notion of taking a look at the existing racial bias and training that's already in place, for example, for the police might be a starting place to take a look at that. I'm not quite sure whether or not that's expansive enough. And we probably need to draw on Felicia's committee to make certain that there is a correct narrative, if you will, on the history of Charleston as part of that curriculum, in addition to dealing with personal biases and microaggressions and those kind of things that we were taken through by Dr. Owens.
Exactly. And that gets down to every city employee having it. So we can have, yes, it's great that we can get the officers and anybody in public safety getting that training, but what about our sanitation workers? What about anybody else who's working? It's getting it across the board. And I think that's one way we can really tackle that issue, is if we get it in the onboarding and then also getting it renewed every once in a while. So people can have those same expectations. We can hold them accountable to those expectations.
Thanks, Jerome. You read my mind. And Darren and the mayor jumped on a little bit late and didn't hear your number one recommendation, which I think is probably the most critical in terms of culture. Could you just elaborate a little bit more on that for the mayor?
Thank you. Sorry, I'm a few minutes late.
All right.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I had to get back back to it. But yes, the racial equity training with a budget for all city employees upon onboarding. When we think about the racial equity training, either be it through REI or through any other training core that we have within the city of Charleston, usually what we see is some of the higher ups getting this training, or somebody in specific positions getting it. But if we can get it on the ground level with everyone within the city, because it's not just the supervisors who have these microaggressions, who have these unconscious biases that we see going on. It's systemic throughout the city. So we can get it to all the city employees with a budget, meaning we have to fund it, and either funding it through Amber's department, or funding it through HR with Amber's department always being consulted on it. I think we can start mitigating some of these issues that we have, and then they can trickle down from the ground up, as opposed to hoping it will come down from the top down.
Well, I think that's an excellent suggestion. I would just say from affordability factor that some of the training we've done for leadership has been a little expensive, and maybe with you know, we increase the numbers of folks we're running through it and get a little more affordable situation. We do have to take a look at the affordability of it. But I can't imagine we can't get a program, a course, a training protocol that's a little less expensive than what we've had.
Right, and even with that, even if you were to bring a group of people in and hire them as city employees to whereas that's what they do within HR. You know, I mean, if you factor out better as far as cost analysis long term, but it's important, be it whether they be under HR or be under Amber or whatnot. But this is needed so we can keep the city running and actually moving to a place where we need to be.
Understood.
Awesome.
Thank you.
And another additional thing that I wanted to mention was, I guess it wasn't a recommendation, it was more of an observation regarding just, I guess, the general sentiment from folks. And Darren, I'm not going to speak for you, but I definitely want the mayor to understand and hear that observation that you made, that, you know, as the commission started, Mayor, and Darren was making some inquiries, there was a perception that, you know, folks didn't want to speak in fear of retribution or in fear of some sort of additional punishment. So Darren, if you could, you know, just kind of share that with the mayor, I think it's important for him to hear.
Well, yeah, it was more so of a hesitancy. You know, we were told we can go out and talk to different people within different fields, you know, with different fields within the city. But then, you know, they're looking, you know, when you talk to them, I speak very candidly. They basically look at you like, I could tell you, you want me to tell you on the record or off the record, you know? And
Right.
you know, we want you to speak. We want people to be able to speak candidly. But if they fear that if I take this back to the city, or if I take this back to an open Zoom call on the city's YouTube or whatnot, somebody will be able to trace it back to what they're talking about. That's a major fear that I feel as if many workers would go are feeling. Now, talking off the record, we have plenty of stories. And I'm thinking of one particular story about a hiring situation that definitely needs to be addressed. But will that person come on the record and say, do we have any sort of a reporting tool? And with that reporting tool, how far will it go, or how could somebody actually be if they without going to the EEOC or go to the South Carolina hiring commission, how can they truly get the justice that they feel is needed? So yeah, I think that was one of our, and then initially when we were looking at all of the different focuses of our internal review committee, that was one big hindrance that we had, to where it made all of us come back and say, all right, we need an anonymous survey. How far reaching we have this anonymous survey go is going to be hard, but we definitely need to get to the folk who are not just sitting at computers all day. This needs to go citywide, and how we make that happen is going to be pretty hard.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Carol.
Darren, are you far enough along with your survey to maybe give us a few, you know, questions that would be representative of what you're going to try to ask each employee?
Yeah, let me try to pull it up. I can't get to it right now. I think it might be on my other computer. However, I do know a few other questions. Be it one of them was looking at their pay, and when was the last time they received a raise? Be it not just a cost of living raise, but the quality of work raise that they have. Another main issue that we have, main question that we have was, do you ever feel any type of implicit bias that from your supervisor or anybody, any of your higher ups? Do you feel any type of biases coming from your fellow coworkers? Do you feel as if the city is setting you up to be in a position to succeed? And that that was one of the more trickier questions that we have, because we were trying to what is success for each position? How can we make that? We went back and forth on that one. How can we make that? How can we make a question that broad that can reach to somebody who's working in an office suite to somebody that's actually working on the ground? What is success to you? So that, yeah, we had a few other questions. I'm sorry, it's on my other computer that I have pulled up, but I don't have my flash drive. But yeah, we're toying around with a few of those questions. It will be a short survey, and I think we tried to narrow it down to 10 different questions. I can get that sent over to you in the morning.
That'd be great. I was just
Darren,
curious.
Sorry,
just to
go ahead.
let
Go ahead,
you
Mayor.
know, 3 years ago, we began an anonymous survey. You might have encountered that or found out about it. And then we did a follow-up last year.
No, July, right?
Pay is on everybody's mind. There's no question about that. But it was anonymous. We did allow folks to identify what department they were in, which we felt was helpful to see if there were any trends within a particular department or not. And so I would just suggest that I want to continue to do that on a regular basis, and we just need to look at the questions that we're asking and add some racial bias questions, as you recommend to this effort.
And that was a survey from July, right?
Correct. So to be honest with you, our kind of normal schedule would be that we wouldn't do it again till 2022. We kind of started doing it every other year. I don't know if we want to wait, but you know, that's kind of the cycle we got on so far.
Thank you, Mayor. It is 6:01. I know Dr. Knight has joined us. I want to be respectful of our time so we can get to the next interim report. Is there any other questions for Darren, or any reactions the next few minutes before we transition?
Yeah, one quick point I wanted to make before we close was that I wanted to remind everybody that it's important for us to be unashamed of our current baseline. There's nothing wrong with your current baseline to show it, is what I'm saying. There's nothing wrong with showing that data because of, and I'll point to one very good example. I recall when I was with the city, there was a survey that ended up going, or some data that was collected to show how well we were being allies to members of the LGBTQIA community. And that number at the time when it first began and when it first came out was a very poor number. But since then, we have ranked to a point where not only was it a proud moment, was it a badge of honor for the city? We even had an ally community that came together of city employees that felt like it was like basically an employee resource group. So I just want to say that to say, like, do not be ashamed of the information. You have to put it forward. It has to be on front page. We've got to be willing to accept that information for what it is, because only then can we, when we see the metrics, we'll be able to really move forward with it and point to a better direction. So that's all I wanted to add.
Hey, Darren. This is Dudley. Just a couple of questions, because as I listened to you, I related a lot of it to performance standards. Whether or not employees have performance standards that can objectively be applied and verified. And as a result of those performance standards, which may be ranked, average, good, outstanding, et cetera. And as a result of that, where they land, okay, they may be able to get a step increase, because a lot of our employees are at a standstill. And the only way they get increases for the most part is through cost of living. So it would be great if you guys can look at performance standards, merit pay, how are promotions given, how are evaluations done.
Right. That goes to biases as well. So
Yes. Are they objective? Are they subjective? So, as you move forward and you start refining, I just think that those are some of the areas you may also want to continue to look at.
Right, and that goes back to the development and training aspect of it. If you can get a step increase, if you have more training and development, is the city setting somebody up to be able to get that training, to get that promotion, to get that merit increase? The city needs to be able to fund these type of things. If I have somebody who has a high school diploma, am I setting them up to go to try to be able to get their associate so they can get that next step up? It's going to cost a lot of money. You have to be able to pay for those credits. But if we're looking at making people successful while working for the city of Charleston, and to make the city of Charleston a better place and a place that people want to be able to work at and spend their career at, it's things that you have to actually invest in.
I agree.
Crystal has her hand raised.
Crystal and Councilman Waring.
Hey, good evening. Sorry. Quick question. In regards to the audit and other pieces that Darren mentioned, would that work be included with the government organization that we're supposed to be partnering with, that we had voted on a couple of meetings ago? That might be a question for Amber. I can't remember. I drew a blank just now, but we voted on working with an entity that focuses on race and equity. And I believe a lot of what we talked about is some of the work that they do with government entities. And Amber, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, that's correct. Mm-hmm. So they would train our department heads and then also help us train a core team who can then take that information back to their departments and help train them.
Would it, however, capture much of what Darren is targeting?
As far as performance?
Yes, performance, the need for equity training.
So there is training involved. They don't talk about performance or performance standards, but there is an employee survey that's attached to the service that they provide. It's the Government Race and Equity.
Right, the Government Alliance. Thank you, Amber, I forgot. But yeah, one of the things that they do is they take their baseline based off of their initial information they gather to help the government agency grow in the area of racial equity. So it would actually, although it doesn't say it in the fine print, they would actually cover some of those human resources aspects that you were talking about, Councilman Dudley.
Thanks, Crystal. Councilman Waring, you had your hand up previously.
Yeah, I just wanted to get some information by way of background to Darren. Now, not 2020, but 2019 and 18, the city gave across the board pay raises to employees. And I believe it was in addition to the cost of living. It didn't happen in 20 because the city had a deficit. And we went to extraordinary lengths not to lay anyone off. Whereas some of the other cities did lay employees off. We didn't furlough anybody. Please believe me, we actually took money from our emergency fund so we wouldn't have to lay any employees off. So, not getting any pay raises in 20, all employees probably have a beef with that. But prior to us doing those extraordinary measures, we actually borrowed money against future tax revenues in 21, so we wouldn't have to lay off employees. So there was a fear of, am I going to get laid off in some departments? And obviously that didn't happen. So kind of keep that in context when you go out doing some of your information gathering that you're going to gather. If the employer is looking at it from the standpoint of 2020, they would be right, no pay raises and things like that, but not for 19 and not for 18.
Right.
And then we actually, I think we're on the goal of getting the low employees up to $15 an hour. But for the pandemic, I think we would have been there. I got 2 other councilmen here, but 4 other councilmen here, and the mayor. We would have been there in 20, getting our lower paid employees up to $15 an hour, but for the economic pain and reducing city revenues in 2020. So right now, the lowest paid employee, I think, is $13.50 an hour, which is still quite a bit in front of where the federal minimum wage is right now at $7.25. So just kind of wanted to give you that background as you go about gathering your information.
Right. I have that as far as last one I've heard of was the 18. I didn't know about the 19 one. My biggest thing when talking to the people that I've talked to is, are they able to afford to live within the city of Charleston that they're working in?
Yeah.
That's the hardest part. I live here. I say the same thing about myself. I work at the College of Charleston. I can't afford to live inside the city. I would love to. I need to, but I need to be able to afford to live here.
Right.
I'm really being able to do it. So that is just being able to live where you're able to, where you are working and making a better place.
That's right. That's why this affordable housing piece is real. I mean, we
Right.
had a report before council last week. I think they said we shot some 12,500 affordable units. I mean, we're making progress, but we got to come up with better ideas, no doubt.
Thanks, Councilman Waring. Darren, anything else before we transition to Dr. Knight?
No, I'll just go ahead and share everything, particularly our appendices that we have for our recommendations, so you can see where the research came from.
All right, awesome. Dr. Knight, I think you are up.
All right. Well, good evening, everyone. I'm sorry for having to log on late. My understanding is I'm just to share the recommendations that we provided in our interim report, right?
Yep.
Okay. So the History and Culture Subcommittee, we presented 6 recommendations in our interim report. The first recommendation is, this is also our number 1 recommendation because it serves as the framework for much of some of the other recommendations we propose. And also I should provide one caveat. We deliberately chose to focus on the public art landscape for our first 3 months of meeting together. So we know there are other aspects of our History and Culture Subcommittee tasks that we have yet to address, and we're in the process of addressing those, such as working with the CVB on providing accurate historical and cultural information to our tourists, and also partnering with some individuals and groups that have interest in revitalizing parks, changing parks, and so forth. So that's on the docket, but these particular recommendations relate to the public art landscape. So our first recommendation is to create a board of public art review, similar to the Board of Architectural Review, that will do the following. First, assess, review, and update existing inventories of public art installations on city grounds, including but not limited to historic monuments, markers, and memorials. Number 2, we propose that the Board of Public Art Review assess and review the propriety of removing or recontextualizing existing public art installations on city grounds, including but not limited to historic monuments, markers, and memorials. And we suggest that they use the following categories of assessment: historical context, content, impact on the community, demographic representation, as in race, gender, class, sexual identity, gender identity, disability, age, etc. We also propose that the Board of Public Art Review, number 3, assess and accept or reject future proposals for public art installations on city grounds. Again, included but not limited to historic monuments, markers, and memorials, and using those same categories of assessment for that critique: historical context, content, impact on the community, demographic representation. And lastly, we would want this Board of Public Art Review, number 4, to solicit suggestions from the public for additions, removals, and recontextualization of public art installations, including those monuments, markers, and memorials, and others. So this was our number 1 recommendation, because in our research, we found that there is no central clearinghouse for this process of erecting public art and assessing public art. We extensively reviewed the Brockington and Associates report on the material condition of monuments on city property, but that report did not assess historical context. That was part of the categories they could have filled out, but our understanding is that, at least what we read, it appeared that that report was mainly designed to provide the Parks and Recreations Department with an assessment of the material condition of those public art installations and how to properly care for them moving forward. But because we're at this critical historical moment that is not new, it's come up many times in our history, of needing to assess the impact, especially on the community, of certain public art installations, we think that an impartial reviewing board that also receives input from the public in terms, and we're not specifying how they'd get that input. I think that would be up to the board to decide, whether it's like a public hearings they may have periodically, or utilizing the model of other cities like New Orleans. Oh, I'm blanking on the other one right now that we examined. But several other cities that have partnered with kind of creative arts firms that also have a racial equity justice lens to them. And they've done surveys that they've provided online, as well as paper. So one I'm thinking of is the Paper Monuments Project. I think that's New Orleans. And I can't remember the other one. Angela, my vice chair, is on here. But that's another way to, to assess
there
public
was another
input.
one from New York that was used.
Yeah, so that was the New
survey.
York Commission. But there was another one too that I can't just recall right now. So that's, it's important to have a clearinghouse. And also this point about assessing or accepting or rejecting future proposals. There is no set process for this right now. So we've had, individuals contact the History and Culture Subcommittee via our co-chairs, especially Councilman Saccharin, just, making sure that we're aware of certain requests. And we have no idea how to direct them as to who to talk to in the city to make the proposed changes that they want. So it would be our hope that this Board of Public Art Review would be given, the power to make those decisions, so that there's a central place that people can go to propose public art installations in the future. And so that's the first recommendation. Secondly, our committee has recommended that the city establish a cultural reparations fund. And those are the words used by several of our subcommittee members. A cultural reparations fund to address historic economic inequities in the ability of African American and other minority communities to commission and erect permanent and temporary public art installations. Essentially, in our research, we learned that really it's up to individual groups or individuals to raise funds to be able to erect permanent or temporary public art installations, whether they be monuments, markers, or whatnot. And several committee members noted that historically, the capital necessary to do such things is so high that it's kind of, it limits who is able to do it. And in our city, because of the historic economic inequities, that disproportionately falls on minority communities to not have the funds to be able to propose these kinds of historic markers or monuments, or raise the money, not propose, but raise the money to commission them, to get the artists to do them. And so the recommendation was to have the city establish a fund, and the committee presented two ways of funding this particular, of raising the revenue for this particular fund, either a tax on large-scale development projects or a designated portion of the accommodations tax. I am in no way, shape, or form a person who really understands the tax laws or anything. This is not my area of expertise. So please don't ask me questions about this, because I don't have the answers. But we do have Angela Mack on the call with us, and she can share a little bit about the first one, I believe, a tax on large scale developments projects, which she's observed in other cities that have been used then to support public art.
Well, and only to say that this is a conversation that has happened before with the city of Charleston that I recollect, particularly under prior directors of cultural affairs, where conversations took place about garnering the money through assessments to major development entities or programs based on what has been done in Oregon, what has been done in New York, and some other places where they use that kind of opportunity to create space, not only to provide the funds for new sculptures, but also to create space for new sculptures with the development that is taking place.
Okay, thank you. Our third recommendation is to establish a mechanism for community-generated monuments and markers that would give agency to constituents of city council districts to decide what and whom to celebrate in their public spaces. And the thought behind this is to task city council members with soliciting this information from their constituents as part of carrying out the mission of this Equity, Inclusion, and Racial Conciliation Commission. The details of that are, things that we have not yet worked out, but that was a recommendation that consistently came up since the framework is already in place for city council members to have particular constituents. Then maybe if we're gonna, disseminate surveys or take some type of, or find a way to receive these comments from the public, that those could be addressed and distributed in accordance with the respective districts that already exist. Number four, the fourth recommendation is to invest in educational initiatives to integrate complex and nuanced histories into our curricula by using public art installations and other matters. And we suggest that the city partner with relevant city departments, but with relevant school districts, with our Charleston and Berkeley County school districts, local colleges and universities, and relevant local cultural or nonprofit organizations to implement this. And this is something that we've been talking about off and on with Ms. Rouse's committee. And we had a couple of meetings just to talk about what some of these partnerships could look like. But we still need to continue those discussions with her committee to provide some more detailed information there. Number 5, our 5th recommendation is that the city host or co-host public discussions and/or public programs to address issues raised by controversial art, memorials, monuments, or markers, and to promote nuanced conversations featuring diverse voices in terms of gender and race about these installations. And so, you know, that really came from our committee members who are really focused on engaging again with the public and having the city partner with we have lots of local organizations that are pursuing racial equity and justice. And I'm sure, well, I should say I'm sure, but I would assume that many of them might be interested in partnering with the city to host these kinds of discussions so that they're not just put out by private groups, but by this public entity showing the city's support for these kinds of conversations and discussions or programs that feature particular experts on these issues. And then number 6, the 6th recommendation is to use digital content and new technologies to make the city's public art installations more accessible to the public. And this was a fun topic to discuss. You know, we talked about the use of the QR codes that are attached to certain monuments. That, you know, that's a great starting point. But there are also, of course, ways that we might be able to use some of the other technologies, mapping technologies. I think that it was Harlan Green with the History Commission that reached out to me and said he's involved with several groups that are doing mapping and just finding ways, again, to promote these projects to the public. And so, again, we're still with our committee. Our main goal, you know, with this first go round was to really just assess what was available already to address some of the questions and concerns that our public has about public art installations. And again, we think that this board of public art review would be able to play a vital role in addressing these issues. So that's all we have. I'll be happy to take questions.
If I may start, Dr. Knight, I love the focus on increasing public art. Honestly, I think we're behind the curve on moving in that direction. But you include all the history with it. And I'm sure y'all looked at our existing history commission or committee and what they do. This proposal for would be broader than what they do. But I mean, did you think about, well, gee, if we did this, we wouldn't need them anymore, or?
No, because the History Commission, Angela sits on that. We found out, and you can tell us to share some more, Angela, but the History Commission at this point only reviews the text on marker applications. Am I correct on that, Angela, that is the main job of the History Commission right now?
That's correct. Mayor, what we discovered was that it is a bit fractured in terms of how monuments and memorials are approved, so that the city's design review committee actually looks at the sculpture, if it is a sculpture or some other type of art form. Then the History Commission really just reviews the text. They don't really have any say, as far as I know, in terms of the design of the monument itself.
That's correct.
Then, of course, there's also the Art Commission, I believe, that and I'm not as familiar with what that commission does, but it became clear because Scott Watson is also on our committee, that there was really not a central location or central group that reviews all aspects of our monuments and markers and memorials, or even any kind of public art projects for that matter. So it seemed sensible to begin to think about a more overarching group that can combine not only the design, the review of the design of the piece, but also the content.
So you would still rely on the History Commission to review the text and kind of
We
make
could, or it could be consolidated. I don't think we've really come to a decision on that part yet. It is, you know, it's about going backwards and going forward at the same time, because we do have to understand the monuments from a contextual basis that we already have, since that has never been done for the city. Only the Brockington report, which is an extremely useful report because it does provide you with all of the monuments that exist. However, they've never been assessed from a content perspective. So I almost feel like, you know, there may be the need for a committee, an overarching committee, and then subcommittees to tackle these different problems.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
Good question.
Carol.
Dr. Knight, you said you only had 6 recommendations, but they were very hefty and meaty. So I think you've really done a lot of work in that particular part of your focus. I really resonate, and maybe I'm reading into, I don't remember which number it was, but when you were focused on convening the public and having, you know, sort of the opportunity to dialogue about a particular location or site or monument or whatever it is that, you know, people are wanting to be more thoughtful about. And it just, you know, just as a riff, it just occurred to me that, you know, in the shadow of the Heritage Act, which we all are railing about, but, you know, that's not going to go away anytime soon in the current legislature that we seem to have. But it would be interesting to be able to take a monument that we would say, if we were just deciding for the city that we wouldn't want to have it where it is any longer, we wouldn't want to have it emphasized in the same way that it is any longer. And then to just have, in the shadow of the Heritage Act, those kinds of serious and thoughtful, you know, discussions and conversations about, if we could reinvent the Heritage Act, what would we do? And I think that would be really brilliant to, you know, not try to fight the Heritage Act for as long as we're alive, because I think it's not going to go anywhere unless, you know, the whole legislature changes. But to really use that as a teaching tool. So I just wanted to give you a committee for that. I think it really could be an engaging part of your work.
Thank you so much, Councilwoman Jackson, because I want to look through my files now, because the one cities project that I just cannot remember, they basically did that. Their survey was, if you could, they didn't have a Heritage Act to contend with, but if you could imagine, I want to say it might have been Philadelphia, if you can imagine what our city's landscape would look like with the monuments you want to see, what would it look like? And it wasn't those words, so I'm going to find it. And I'm gonna also ask Councilman Saccharin to help me keep track of hands, because I wasn't quite clear on who was next.
Dudley, go ahead.
Yeah, really great report from both of you. Did you have an opportunity to discuss with our Director of Cultural Affairs the need for a cultural plan? One of the first things that the Artists Commission charged that office with was to do an assessment cultural assessment and come up with a plan which would be all encompassing, not just theater, not just art in general, which would include outdoor art as well. I'm not sure where he is in that assessment, but I would suggest that you hone in on that with him and see where any of this may fit in his assessment. Now, the Art Commission has not met in some time, but that was one of the initial requests that the New Arts Commission, because it's very new, because history and art was together and was separated.
Right.
So you may have a rare opportunity to even help shape that commission.
Okay.
To try and do many of the things that you just reported on in your recommendation. But I really think that if you have a discussion with Scott in terms of where is he on cultural planning, and see whether or not you can incorporate any of this into that.
Right.
Thank you. I didn't know that. I didn't know about that with Scott,
Councilmember
so I wrote it
Gregory,
down.
Scott has been at all of the meetings and has been a strong voice in terms of the recommendations that you've just heard. I think with monuments, markers, and memorials, there is this need to sort of go back and look at what we already have with regards to assessing the existing monuments so that we can begin to move forward. And as Felice knows, another member of our committee and I have been putting together the wish list, so to speak. Those works that commemorate individuals or events or places that are still missing in our cultural landscape. So I know that, you know, Scott is interested in creating this overarching understanding of where we are and where we should go as far as the arts are concerned. But I also feel that monuments, markers and memorials need special attention.
I would agree. I would agree with you, and it really sounds as though some of these recommendations could reshape some of our existing committees. Our history committee in particular. And I think that is something that really needs to seriously be looked into.
Okay, we can definitely put that on the agenda. Quickly, I just wanted to share this with everyone. It's kind of small, but the group the most important, like the biggest group out there with monuments, Monument Lab out of Philadelphia. This is the survey they distributed to their all residents of Philadelphia. And this was their question: what is an appropriate monument for the current city of Philadelphia? And people could do a verbal description, they could draw, they only wanted the person's zip code. You didn't have to put your name if you didn't want to. But this was a powerful project that they came up with. They also wanted age to see, you know, where were people in the Philadelphia community thinking, how were people across different age groups thinking about monuments? And I want to say this was done, I cannot remember the year that it was done, but Scott Watson, speaking of him again, he does have some ties to these groups, 2018. And anyhow, just wanted to share that with y'all. And so we could try to, you know, follow up specifically with this group. Although right now Monument Lab is the recipient of one of those big grants from Kellogg Company, and they are really focusing on helping individual cities, but I'm sure they could answer a few questions for us if we had it.
Thanks, Felice. I think Darren had his hand up.
Yes, real quick. One, Mural Lab, Mural Arts Philadelphia does a lot of great work, and I'm glad they've actually worked along Monument Lab. I was in a conference with them a few years ago, and it was the work that they're doing is pretty amazing that the city of Charleston should really look at. My question, I don't know if this goes directly to Dr. Knight or whatnot, but who controls the artwork within City Hall?
I'm gonna let Angela answer that.
Well, the City Hall collection belongs to City Hall. And the Gibbs was actually tasked back when the renovation took place to do a reinstallation of those works. However, the works that we were given to work with are the works that belong to City Hall. So, all of those paintings, the sculpture pieces, etc., are the property of the city of Charleston.
Yeah,
So it should be pretty easy for us to make any changes?
I was saying.
That's a really good question, Darren.
That's your
It's something
call.
that I hadn't thought of.
I've been waiting for this question for a long time.
When the
Very
apology
long time.
I was standing in front
So may I just make a small comment? So when we were tasked with doing the reinstallation in City Hall proper, I don't know if you recognize the fact, but there is a woman on the main wall where George Washington hangs. And I wanted to make sure that a woman was there.
an Avery graduate.
And I believe she was the first female
City councilwoman,
member.
correct.
She was,
Clelia McGowan.
for her time, she was a civil rights and suffragette leader.
It was.
She really has a pretty amazing story.
Story,
But,
yeah.
I hear you, Angela. I must say, whenever I've asked about moving things around at City Hall, I've been told I gotta get Angela's permission.
Oh, no.
I really think it falls under the History Commission myself.
Under the full history commission with the city?
Yes.
Not my history and culture subcommittee.
Not you. No.
I asked that question. So say if this Dr. Knight's committee wanted to do an art installation at City Hall like we would do at City Gallery, because they're both city-owned buildings or whatnot. It's possible to change things around to be able to put it in an installation inside of City Hall for, say, Women's History Month or for Black History Month or Hispanic History Month. Be it June for Pride Month, if we wanted to, because the city owns this property and they own the art collections there, we can make the city an actual exhibit, City Hall being an actual exhibit, and also attract people to City Hall. That's possible.
I'll answer that one. Yes.
Thank you for that idea, Darren. That's wonderful.
I would love and embrace the opportunity for the city to do a complete reassessment of its art holdings.
Well, Angela, looks like we have another item on our agenda, but that's good. That's good.
Why did I open my mouth?
Well, the cultural aspect is quite large. And of course, it doesn't just encompass the arts, but that's such a big part of our city's imprinture, how we present ourselves, that this is something that we must address. So there we go. I'm writing down. Okay. Who's next?
Dr. Waring, Councilman Waring. Dr. Waring, you're up.
Yeah, just call me Keith, please. Angela, if you would, Could you expand on that assessment? You said make an assessment of the art. I mean, what does that mean? I'm a country boy. When I was raised up West Ashley, it was very rural. Help me out with that.
Well, I mean, I think it's really an expansion on one of the recommendations that Felice mentioned and our committee has been working on, and that is a content assessment of all the monuments, markers, and memorials. So if we're going to do that, we might as well do the collection at City Hall. Because, I mean, you know, they've all been assessed from a condition standpoint. Everybody, you know, every object that is on city property or in City Hall has been managed in some way, and some assessment has been done in terms of their care and their condition. But there's never been an assessment of their content, who the people are, why they're there, what the significance is. Some of the pieces were donated by individuals that the city then accepted for whatever reason. Some of the people, I think almost all the pieces in the collection were donated except for the large portraits like George Washington, John C. Calhoun, Andrew Jackson, and Monroe. Those were all commissions that the city did back in the late 18th century and early 19th century. So those were all city commissions, as is the sculpture of William Pitt that's over in the county courthouse. That was a city commission. So the remaining, I believe, most of the remaining pieces were donated.
Hey, Angela and Felice, I'm just going to say it. We pulled the statue down off a pedestal, but it's still living large in City Hall. Just say it.
It's a conundrum, isn't it?
Say it. Let's put it up there.
I think that, yeah, this is an opportunity, you know, again, we had not addressed the city artwork, the artwork in City Hall on our subcommittee. So I'm eager to take this back to the subcommittee and have a full discussion of it. And in our final proposals, you know, present some recommendations specific to that art collection, since it is something that the city has full control of. So it's exciting to learn this information and to be able to move forward with it.
Now, I'm pretty sure, and it's been a long time since I've done anything with the City Hall collection, but I'm pretty sure the Department of Cultural Affairs has that inventory from when the works were installed back in, when was it, Mayor Tecklenburg, 2015, I guess? Yeah, when City Hall was completed.
It was like
early
10, 12 years ago.
Yeah, 10 or 12 years ago, that's right, much earlier. So I believe that inventory still exists. And if my memory serves me correct, Council Member Gregory, there is more than one portrait in City Council, similar to the sculpture that we tore down.
Trust me, I know.
Angela, I would love to work on that exhibition between the Avery and the Gibbs for City Hall one day.
Okay.
We have a lot of Charlestons we could put up.
You do, as does the Gibbs, and that would be an incredible exhibition to do. Tamara Butler actually has just joined our Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Accessibility Committee that's going to be working with our Gibbs board.
Let's do it.
Thanks, Darren and Angela. Carol, you had your hand up, and I think we're going to, at that point, just adjourn if there's any other questions. But Carol, you did have your hand up. And then Mayor.
Jerome has his hand up.
All right, and then Jerome. So Carol, Mayor, and then Jerome.
You're on mute. You're on mute, Carol.
She said, go ahead. Mayor, go ahead.
So I welcome the addition of the city art at City Hall as part of this overall discussion. But but I will share, there's some remarkable stories, even when it comes to figures such as Mr. Calhoun, that I think are fascinating. And one of which is a small bust of Mr. Calhoun that was on the bookshelf in the mayor's office when I took office. And he was kind of up there on the top shelf. And he was so high up there, I thought maybe it was like some Roman figure. He's got like a little toga on him or something. And so I didn't even realize until a couple of years later when the former historian or docent of City Hall came by to share a story with me. And she brought me this remarkable story, and I ended up reading the biography of Archibald Grimke. And if you don't know the story of Archibald Grimke, it's just fascinating. He is nephew of the Grimke sisters, but he was born into slavery. After the Civil War, he became, I think, the second graduate of Harvard, the first African-American graduate of Harvard Law School, and had a successful law practice with Mayor Pillsbury, who was the Reconstruction mayor of Charleston, appointed after the Civil War, and was an attorney from Boston. So this is, and Archibald, by the way, went on to become an incredible civil rights leader, first director of the NAACP in Washington, D.C., and just a remarkable story. But he owned this little bust of John C. Calhoun, and he returned it to the city upon his death. I mean, if you read the whole story about Archibald and his life and where he came from, just it almost blows your mind as to why he even had this and why he returned it to the city. Anyway, there's some fascinating stories in some of that artwork that we've got.
Yeah, and I think those are the things that we'll need to investigate. But at the same time, even a bust owned by a prominent African American figure in the city can still be placed in a museum or an art, another place, and not prominently displayed in City Hall with the story attached to it. That's my personal take on it. But again, it will be up to the as we discussed in the subcommittee, how specifically to move forward with these issues. I know Jerome wanted to say something. Thank you so much, Mayor.
He's not in a prominent place, I'll tell you.
Thank you, Mayor, so much for that story.
This is not historical or artistically related comment. I don't know whether or not I missed the update on where we are in terms of identifying the technical assistance for this mighty band of warriors and coming up with our final report. Did I freeze?
No, you're talking about getting a writer to pull all this together.
Well, I mean, the resolution we passed, which was, I thought, to kind of get an assessment of where we were, come up with an action plan, and then help us get to a final report with a, so just where we are on that particular piece.
And I think what we're doing now, just in terms of sort of listening to all the various recommendations from the subcommittees, and ultimately that will be done. We're committed to do that because in addition to what you guys are recommending, there have been a lot of recommendations on the floor already that needs to be included. So there will be I would say a drop dead date for us to get final recommendations from the subcommittee. And we've already had a discussion with the mayor that we want to hire someone to do the writing and pulling all this together with us.
So what I thought the spirit of the resolution was that we had gotten to a certain point in a process, and that having an individual kind of take a look at where we are, and then giving suggestions about how we got from where we are to where we go. That could, for example, give instructions, all right, for our subcommittee, all right, in terms of how to further process our information, so that would get us to the final report. That's what I thought we were doing, but.
Jerome, you are absolutely correct in that, making that conclusion based on the conversation we had. I think it's just incumbent upon us to revisit that with Amber and the mayor and Dudley and figure that out. We have identified a few folks that could potentially step in and do that, but I think it's on us. So Mayor, Amber, and Dudley, I think that's something we need to meet on and move forward with. But it's incumbent and important for us to get that person on board so we can get us over the finish line, at least with putting the recommendations together. Because I do think the challenge that we will have as a council is taking some of the recommendations and morphing them into real action, legal action from an ordinance standpoint, and changes to some of our policies.
And we still haven't gotten past the formatting part of this either.
Right.
We did send out some formats, and we understand that we cannot fill in, you can't fill in all the blanks, but those are blanks that could be filled in by city staff as well as the consultant that we pull on board. So it's just for consistency, or maybe we'll have the consultant to put it in that format. But it would be much easier if we had a standardized format for the submission of these recommendations. And I strongly suggest that we do the best that we can to put it in the format that was sent out by Amber.
And then
that's not to say that's going to stop us trying to pull this person on board, because I think you're right, Jerome. That's very important at this point, at this juncture.
Are we meeting weekly now, Amber and Dudley?
We've completed all the subcommittees?
We have 2 more.
Right. So those are completed. I think that we have to sort of get through it as quickly as possible so we can bring that person on board.
Okay. I just want to make sure we add this to the next agenda for an update for folks. I think, Jerome, you're absolutely right. It's a great question. Carol, did you had a question? I'm not sure if you got a chance to ask it.
No, thanks. I appreciate that.
Any additional questions for tonight?
Great reports, guys.
Yeah, awesome.
Thank y'all.
Really, really good. Good work.
Good conversation, honest conversation, which is very helpful. And I just want to, before we depart, I think John really.
We can't hear you. Can't hear you.
No.
No.
Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Now.
Yeah.
Before we conclude tonight, I just wanted to reiterate John's point that he made earlier about owning and understanding our baseline and being transparent and honest. I think that's a real critical point for me anyways, and resonated with me. So there was some discussion tonight where I felt like it was a bit challenging and uncomfortable to hear, but I appreciate that, John, bringing that up. It means a lot to the commission.
Can I just make one observation that I think is very important here? And it relates to our internal assessment and the importance of our starting to look at zoning. And we need to pull Darren and Ross together so that zoning assessment can start, because it could be a subcommittee of the subcommittee. Okay, and I think that's what it's going to take, Darren. I'd like for you and Ross to start that dialogue so that Ross can get started on that portion of the internal piece. Is that okay with everybody? Okay, all right. Just wanted to make sure we got that out of the way, guys, okay?
And they should inform the comprehensive plan.
Didn't hear you, Mayor.
They should inform the comprehensive plan that's being reviewed right now with their discussion.
Yes, 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 yes. You mean on zoning specifically, or?
Yes, on zoning.
Okay, we're in the same place.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Looks like Abraham had a question.
Yeah, one thing.
I'm sorry.
So I wanted to, Dudley, I wanted to make sure, what would the subcommittee on housing and mobility have? What would their role be in that zoning assessment? I think that's something that, you know, some of our recommendations have already kind of spoken to some type of modification in the zoning. So I'd like to be involved in that also, you know, as far as our committee.
Thanks for that, Abraham. And we'd already had some preliminary discussion with Ross of how this stuff is across the board, and did highlight the fact that there's a zoning issue in housing that you guys have already started and want to make recommendations. Okay. So you will, we will, okay, pull all that together and make sure that somebody from the housing subcommittee is on the zoning subcommittee. Okay, that works? All right.
Thank you. Ross, go ahead.
Let's end single family zoning in the city of Charleston and make national news. How about that? We can pick that up. We can pick that up offline.
We'll leave on a high note. Is there any more business to come before this commission this evening? With that, is there a motion to adjourn?
So move to adjourn.
All right. You all have a good night. Thank you.
Thanks, y'all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, good night.
Good night.